homes. I love the way that things are built. Right now, I'm over by a homeless camp. There's a quasi-wooded area right next to the railroad tracks, in between the railroad tracks and the dairy farm here. And as I look around, I see the stuff that the camp is made out of, right? And then I see the stuff that is surrounding me. And it weirds me out that we can't utilize these materials surrounding us that'll grow back. We got to use this crap that we have to pack in. You know, if our ancestors had to pack everything in like this, they'd have never survived. Now, you guys who have the argument about Stonehenge and useless crap like that, well, first of all, to them it wasn't useless. If they built it, there was a purpose. Second of all, and in order to have the abundance of time, resources, and energy to be able to build monolithic structures such as that, and, of course, the Great Pyramids, and many other construction projects, of course, going way, way back to before Egypt, or Kemet, depending on what era you want to really point out and push. Now, what's this got to do with horses? Well, all right, we had these guys with a type of horse called Welsh ponies. Welsh ponies are actually a ancient breed of horse, just like the Tiki Tal and the Norse wild horse. It's the Norwegian, isn't? I think it's Norwegian. But that Norwegian wild horse was not very tall. I mean, we're talking about 12 to 13 hands high for a tall one. That's how horses are measured, by the way. Now, I've been watching these programs where these guys make ancient chariots, and I've done every aspect of what they're doing. Every aspect of building an ancient chariot. I've worked with the rawhide. I've used rawhide lashings for a reason. I've actually made my own rawhide. Not out of cow leather, but I've made it. I've done the wood bending. I've done steaming, hand planing. I've even bent wheels, which is not as hard as it seems when you know what you're doing. A lot of these folks making these ancient chariot reproductions, it's one guy who does it primarily, and he's from Great Britain. And the one thing in all of the programs that you see on the History Channel with this feller, he's always using horses. Actual horses. We're talking about 14, 15, 16 hands high. He's using actual horses. You know? I mean, these things are, when you're looking at the chariot, what you're not looking at is how much of a difference that really makes. You wouldn't think that a horse being, well, about 11 inches at the long end of the fulcrum, it's 11 inches taller than it should be. You wouldn't think that would make a lot of difference. It truly does. It makes a difference in the way that the chariot rides. It makes a difference in the way that the chariot sags. These guys are making chariots that are to historical measurements. You know, this guy picked a chariot for Egypt. He makes this Egyptian chariot from a pharaoh's tomb, and he puts it all together, and then he's using 14-handed horses. 14 hands high. I mean, that's still 2 to 3 hands higher than it needs to be, or that it should be. Now, we're not talking about a lot of difference between pony range and horse range. It's really not. But we've got horses that do get pretty tall. You know, 16 hands high is a pretty friggin' tall horse in my opinion. But one of the things that I always see is, all right, for example, that particular chariot wasn't even designed to be pulled by a horse. It's designed to be pulled by a donkey, a literal donkey. The reason I say that is because that is what a zebra is. A zebra is a fucking donkey. It's an ancient breed. It's got the extra molar and everything. It's not actually a horse, though. It's equine, yes. It's equus, just like the tiki tall is equus. Just like, or equine, I'm sorry. Equus is a very specific equine breed, and it's extinct. So that's cool, right? But it was an ancient breed, had the extra molar. These are all small horses. I mean, the Norse, the Vikings, when they went through with their horses, they're ponies. And they marched through in the Middle Ages. And then we've got the, of course, the Arabs, the Arabian horse. That's actually another ancient breed, just so you know. It also has special flaps on its nose so that it can close its nose in a sandstorm. How odd is that? It's also got a different contour to its nose. But also an Arabian is a really small horse. I mean, it's barely not a pony. So what's the point of all this? Well, we've got a lot of stuff that we're looking at, and there's little things that you might not think would make a whole lot of difference that really do. There's a degree of give to one of the chariots, the one for Egypt, that is not acceptable for modern horses. And part of that degree of give, you can actually put that degree of give on a donkey or even on a zebra. The reason that donkeys and zebras were used, well, specifically zebras, were used for pulling chariots is because they had a bit more stamina, could carry a bit more weight, and yeah, we like to pretend that during the ancient Egyptian era that people were riding cavalry horses. No, they weren't. They used chariots for a reason. Horses in that degree had not been tamed yet. They weren't exactly something that you wanted to ride. Over many centuries, we bred a lot of these horses that we did use for later chariots. This would have been, mind you, during or after, or during or at the very end of the Iron Age. A lot of the stuff that was unearthed, they went and pulled up a bunch of horse remains with some of these ancient Celtic burials where there's at least partial chariots, and they say, oh, well, they're buried with a bunch of horses. And you go and you look at them, and they all have the extra tooth. Now, I didn't understand this myself because I've always loved horses, but I didn't understand the extra tooth or the significance of it. When they went and looked at all these chariots, they didn't bother to make a distinction between the height. And that height makes just a few degrees of difference even for the rider. Especially, let's say you're on an Egyptian chariot, your axle is at the very rear of that thing. So what that means is that you've got a horse that's a little bit lower to the ground, or an animal that's a little bit lower to the ground. And it's also a stubborn animal that'll fight. Zebras will bite you I wouldn't put it past if you put a mountain lion with a zebra one-on-one. The zebra might very well whoop the shit out of the mountain lion, or kill it, like that video of the donkey doing so. Now, although they're a lot more closely related than they are to horses, and of course a mule is kind of a cross between one and the other. Between a horse and a donkey. It's known for being a lot more temperamental and a lot more voracious about preserving its life. So that extra couple of degrees of you standing and getting the traction on that thing, that's your ability to actually dig in. That extra couple of degrees, that's the difference between standing on a flat plane while moving forward. It's easy to slide off of that, isn't it? Even with texture and grip. But if you drop it down 2 to 3 degrees from a flat plane, and you've got just a little bit of grip, as you're going forward, your body weight is helping you to dig into that surface. And I was looking at the shape of a lot of these horses, and they're thick horses. They're not little dinky things. These are thick horses that are pulling all these chariots. A lot of the ones in the northern part of the Irish, or not Irish, but the British Isles, the northern end, they've got a lot of them, well, ponies. They're Welsh ponies, an ancient breed. They still exist. You can still get them. You can get Welsh ponies in the United States. When you imagine a chariot being pulled, you want to think of something big and huge, like a Belgian. This thing dwarfs the chariot. But then when you look at the situation where you see all these Roman pillars that have these horses on them, they've got two very distinct kinds of horses. You notice that they've got mostly big, fat, robust horses with really thick necks. You know, these are thick horses. But proportionally, modern horses make man look tiny sitting on top of them. Ponies don't. Their musculature kind of does, though. And that musculature is the important part of the way those chariots were designed. So they're a little bit more rigid than they would be if you had a modern horse. A modern horse is, well, they're fragile by comparison. The longer limbs are easier to break. It takes more muscle mass in order to be able to push the same amount of weight. They're too tall. They're too long. Now then there's the ones that have, and I'm not sure how many of y'all have looked at the Roman columns, but there's a lot of them. And some of them have a ancient breed of horse called a tiki tal. This is it's tall for its size because it's a very dainty animal. But their necks are at the wrong angle for a horse. They've also got that extra teeth, and they also always look sickly. And, of course, some of the Roman chariot racers, when you look at the Roman columns, it depends on which era that they made the engravings. And we like to pretend that these are stylized. No, the Romans made things very, very accurate on those stones. On those stone reliefs, when you see a Roman soldier in his gear, and then you see the actual gear that has been excavated, you realize that they're one and the same. But then the other parts of it, we want to say, oh, well, those are described wrong, or they're shown wrong on the column. But why would they be? If the other things on the column are accurate and proportionally accurate, then why are we pretending that the horses are stylized? Why are we pretending that the ships are stylized or the chariots are stylized? Then we see the chariots themselves. This guy has reconstructed no less than 4, I believe, chariots that I've watched shows on, and he always makes the same mistake. He uses horses. If you wanted to be a little bit more historically accurate, he needs to get some Welsh ponies or something stockier like the Norse pony. Or he needs to grab a couple of donkeys, because they're going to be a much better approximation on the Egyptian chariot than a horse. Alright, none of this is important. None of this saves lives, but, well, it's all useful information. You guys who are disgusted by going out in the woods, you think it's gross and dirty, You know, if you can go out into the woods, smack a couple of rocks together, and build yourself a camp from there, you've got quite an education that people in a lot of different places in the world that are third world, or that we would consider third world, but people are somehow yet thriving and flourishing in these areas, living with these ancient methods. There's a lot of places in the world where if you were able to do that, you'd be a useful person indeed. You would be cherished because your knowledge, well, it's based on nature. If you can draw pigments from the ground or from the plants, if you can get your own sealants out of the trees, especially if you can make the tree thrive in the process, which you can take a tree and rob it of its sap and yet make it healthier in the process. It's kind of the system of having a cow. You know, you can go out and you can kill yourself some dinner that's wild game. The idea of a cow is that it's a big animal. You can harvest a lot of that stuff, but it's going to take an investment. You have to invest the time and energy into maintaining that cow and making sure that it gets to the peak of its health so that you can get the most out of the meat. Anyway, I got to get back to my vehicle. It's getting dark. It's 8:30. The park here closes in an hour and a half, so that's all the longer I have to stay parked there anyway. I got to call Tom just before 9 o'clock. I want to make sure that where he was going, he doesn't end up getting in trouble or getting beaten or get stolen from or get accused of stealing something he didn't steal by that friggin' nut job lady. She's not really crazy, though. I mean, her actions are crazy. Her way of thinking is crazy, but it's also the fact that she's obviously learned that negative attention is the attention that she can get. With me, when I was trying to get the positive attention that I needed to stop this abuse and it didn't work, well, that's when the negativity came out. When I do the right thing, you ignore me. When I do what I'm told to do, you ignore me. When I go to the people I'm told to go to, you ignore me. When I scream at the top of my lungs, you pretend I'm Satan himself. No, I'm one of those people who's constantly looking at the world around me and wondering why it is people are making such an incredible waste of their lives. I could cut down most of the foliage that's here, use it for a lot of very useful things just because I took the time when I was stuck by myself in the woods or stuck in a foster home or group home. When you're in the woods, that's when you get to take the time to actually test your skills. Try out new things that you may have only ever read about or seen on TV. When you're locked up, you got a lot of time on your hands, so you do a lot of reading. I say that proportionally, the horses that are on those columns and in those paintings and ancient reliefs, I say they're proportionate. I say those horses are as small as they are because they're supposed to be. I also say cigarettes are bad, okay? Especially when you have to roll your own, there's no filter, and you have the likelihood of sucking tobacco into your throat. If it slides across your tongue, it tastes nasty. When it hits the back of your throat, it tastes nasty too. It's just a different nasty. Oh yeah, and you'll cough it up. Anyway, I'm going to get back to the David Weber feller. I like what they do. I like how he works together with people, even if he doesn't agree with them. Even if they have a knockdown, drag-out argument, they're not knocking each other down or dragging it out. But next time, I think with all these chariots that he's made, I think they need to retry it. And I think they need to retry it in Nebraska over by Scotts Bluff. And the reason that they need to retry it in Nebraska over by Scotts Bluff is because they have donkeys there, they have mules there, they also have zebras there, and they have camels there. So these are all different animals that can be tried and tested. Now camels, I want you to pay attention to this. There's two main types of camels. And yes, there's two different primary breeds, the one hump and the two hump. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the difference, just like with the modern and the ancient horse breeds. There's a lot of people that over the years have had prize camels and raised those prize camels and raised those camels specifically for the traits that they want in a camel. Those camels are not the same camels after all these years as the original camels they came from. They are genetically modified because they're specifically bred for an intent and purpose. Out in nature, the one that's going to thrive the most is the one who is the most hardy for the terrain at that point in time. But when mankind starts getting involved, well, we breed them for what we want. History shows us as being wrong every time. Now there's something to be said for the fact that domesticated animals, or even wild animals that are brought in, not domesticated, but raised as pets nonetheless, they do tend to live longer. And then there's the cormorants, I believe is what it's called. It's a bird that they fish with in Japan. They live up to 30 years as fishing tools, actually. But they'll only live 6 to 8 years in the wild. Yeah, they'll live longer. And over time, we kind of get accustomed to that, and their genetic line gets accustomed to that. But let's say, for example, we think that big horses are the best, right? So we breed these big horses, and there's a reason that the only ancient breeds that we have, they're all literally pony-sized. None of them are actual horses. Not according to what we consider horse-sized. So there's a lot of stuff that I look at and study and manipulate and play with. I would love to be the guy who builds all this shit. I would. I'd also love to be the guy to stand in David Weber's face and say there is evidence that they used both donkeys. That's right, donkeys are definitely desert animals. That's something a lot of people don't know. There are different breeds of donkeys. Zebras are quite effective in savanna grasslands, but they also encroach the desert. I mean, most of it, northern part of Africa, is desert land. There's also the fact that you've got a giant river, and that giant river is the Nile. And the great thing about the Nile is that along its banks, with the flooding that brings all that sediment and makes that area so fertile, well, that brings a lot of these wild animals closer. There's a type of zebra called the imperial zebra, or the emperor's zebra. They have more stripes. The stripes are closer together, and they're bigger. Now, when you enter into a situation like, let's say, an ice age, you enter a period of time where food is in decline. The first creatures that are going to suffer from that aren't going to be the carnivores. The first animals to suffer in a situation like that are the herbivores, because their food starts to dwindle first. the plants start to dwindle first. It makes them weak and easy prey. And then, of course, that does nothing but increase the carnivore population. And you got to wait for the carnivores to starve off. The mass extinctions that we've had throughout the history of dinosaurs that we keep showing, a lot of those were not mass extinctions. We have, I believe, 7 confirmed mass extinctions now. But it's not always a mass extinction that killed a dinosaur. Sometimes, like with the ones that we see that have wounds on them that did not appear to heal, they probably died from that wound, or other wounds that we may not see because, like most predators, the predators back then probably would have started eating from the underbelly. They probably would have gone for the underbelly and the throat. So when we do experimental archaeology, which is basically what this whole thing was about from the beginning, we need to look at not just the object, but also the power plant for that object. I mean, if you're looking at a ancient painting of a Maserati 10,000 years from now, right? Somebody coated their painting in plastic and put it in a dark cave, and you found it 10,000 years from now, and you're looking at this Maserati with the hood open, and you see the engine that's in there. That's the engine that was in it. That's going to be, pretty darn close to the approximated size. When somebody who makes one of those, when they're paid to paint a Maserati, they want to have somebody look at it and know right away it's a Maserati. If there's stuff that is off base, or it's misshapen or misformed, there are people who are totally into Maseratis who are going to critique that and break it down to nothing, and that artist will have problems drawing any more pictures for Maserati and possibly any other car manufacturer. So they want to get it right. When they put it on the posters and the advertisements, they want to get it right. And that's what those ancient Roman reliefs were. Yeah, the people who commissioned those wanted to make sure that it was right. And the people who were commissioned to do it, yeah, they wanted to make sure they got it right too. Their name was on the line. Their money was on the line. I think that David Weber should, he's built the Chariots. I think he should try them all out with, I hate western Nebraska, but he should go to Scotts Bluff. Scotts Bluff, they've got the animals that he would need to test out all of the things that he was showing. There's a few other ones where he was talking about camels. He didn't seem to like the camels much, but they got camels there too. I'm going to get back into looking at some of the Chariots because they are really cool. The way they made them back in the day is really cool. I've got the stuff in my vehicle to make, pretty much every kind of Chariot there is, just because I have the tools to do it. I just have to have an area with natural materials. If you want me to build an Egyptian-style Chariot, I can definitely do it. If you want me to make a Welsh Chariot, I can do it. You want me to make a Chinese Chariot, I can do it. I've got the tools, just not the materials. If I have to make it out of Oregon materials, no, it's not going to be a Chinese Chariot. It's not going to be accurate if it's not made out of the same woods. It's not going to have the same tensile strength, the same amount of give, the same amount of bend, the same weight, or the same density. It's not going to perform the same. So it may look the same, but that's the difference. Like, let's say you've got like a Maserati. If you get the alloys right and the engine lasts a really super long time, you're super excited. If it's all bargain barrel parts that are put in it, then it's just a lookalike. It's a cheap knockoff. There's a guy who makes cars out of wood, like actual running cars in miniature out of wood for his son. And he makes them on YouTube, and it's really cool. You know, he's made his son like a couple of really super cool Mercedes sports cars and stuff like that. Didn't even know Mercedes made sports cars. They're knockoffs. They're also smaller than they should be. But that's stylized. When somebody comes back and later date and looks at the whole rat thing, first of all, they're going to see that it's a giant rat wearing a t-shirt with his eyes bugging out of his head and his tongue sticking out. Yeah, they might think that there's actually a rat like that, but they probably won't. They'll probably look at the vehicle and recognize that anything that we actually have that resembles those rides are small. They're lawnmowers or smaller, little toys. So we're not putting two different things together there, where we're taking a nicely formed Maserati, drawn the way that it should be, and then putting a giant rat in it. We're not taking a Roman soldier by that same aspect there. We're not taking a Roman soldier and creating him in these reliefs and statues where he is depicted with these horses, with these chariots. Yeah, we're not going to make them accurate and put stylized horses up. All right, that was 32 minutes to say something that really was summed up in about 5 sentences, but damn, I love talking about myself, don't I? All right, I wasn't really talking about myself through most of it. You know how we end these videos? Hope you learned something. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper, and no victim left behind. Amen.